look, emotions are great, opinions are great. It doesn't mean that you're right all the times, right? So you have to be able to pivot, right? So an agile process allows you to pivot faster and lower the cost factors and the risk factors of failure.
What kind of, like, when you are working with like product and project managers, what do you find is similar and different about their approach to like structuring a project? You know, when you talk about using like Kanban or Agile or Scrum or I mean, these are, you know, sort of categories, but as everybody knows, like there's a scale that Agile is practiced on and oftentimes a waterfall, you know, with some Agile sprinkled in. Have you noticed any patterns of behavior?
I think again, this is just from our experience. I think agile is definitely the more preferred method, and more agencies and more companies are adopting it. Nothing is ever set in stone, so you have to be able to adapt and pivot, right? So it's very important to keep emotions out of the process, so that and opinions have to be valued but measured, right? Because you'll have a project, it's very easy to fall into the your own biases and into your own ideas, right? Especially for project managers, right? They start getting so deep and so so attached to their process, and sometimes it's very hard to break them out of it, right? So I constantly remind my guys that, look, emotions are great, opinions are great. It doesn't mean that you're right all the times, right? So you have to be able to pivot, right? So an agile process allows you to pivot faster and lower the cost factors and the risk factors of failure. Do you have a preference? What is your preference? What are your thoughts on this?
I prefer always starting like any kind of phase of the project with as much information and data as possible, and that includes user research and usability testing. Because oftentimes, you'll start a project where you're looking at like search history on the site. You're looking at the Google Analytics, and so you can kind of see how people are moving around. But I think like a true digital transformation always incorporates that storytelling element of data that's often overlooked. And so, but the problem is like sometimes doing that research, it requires like a little bit of planning. It requires some budget, depending on what you're doing. Maybe you have to.
So this is interesting. I'm going to interrupt you for a second. I apologize, but it's a very interesting part. So I'd like you to just dive in a little bit of an importance factor in that research phase, right? So a lot of stakeholders don't truly understand this discovery phase, this research phase that designers have to go through. They just think it's pushing buttons. Unfortunately, no disrespect to anyone, but in my experience, it's like when they see the outcome, they're like, oh, okay, I could have done that in Paint. Like,
it's like of course we should be doing that. Why wouldn't we? Yeah.
Coming to a conclusion of a beautiful product, functional product, a product that has logic and common sense and purpose behind it. It has so much baggage to get to it, right? Let's talk about that a little bit.
I don't know that I would use the word bag.
It's baggage. Listen, it's hours of research and learning.
It's sense making. That's
sense
the
the PC term is sense making.
Yes.
Okay.
No matter what you do, you're having tons of information thrown at you all the time. I mean, even if you choose not to do usability testing or any kind of user research, like you're still having conversations with people who know a lot about their job. You're still looking at data about what's happening on the website. So you're getting information about the what. You're hearing about the assumptions and the things. And we've talked about this before, but the people inside your organization, they're experts on the customer. Like that should be acknowledged. But there are so many other political forces and like headwinds that you're dealing with inside of an organization that if you're not making an effort to really do something that's like human-centered and like bringing in those stories about your customers to talk about why people are doing stuff, to observe how they're responding to the brand, how they're responding to the experience of purchasing something from you. You're not going to get that like emotional connection that I think is really critical. We've talked a lot about like where design fits into digital transformation, and I think it's not so much these hard skills of like producing graphic assets, selecting typography, creating the rules and the style guidelines. It's also about the soft skills that often aren't really seen on a day-to-day basis because they're the things that facilitate the creation of the deliverables. So they're the things that make the soft skills make space for that sense making to happen so that you can get to the deliverables. Keeping that in mind, if you're not making space for the customer's voice in your decision-making process, then it's not going to naturally happen there. And so that's why when you're looking at that data and you're iterating through an e-commerce project, having the what, the Google Analytics, the search keywords that you're seeing to influence, any navigational changes you might be making. You also want to balance that with like just really simple user tests. I mean, honestly, putting your e-commerce site in front of somebody on a different team, or maybe, the barista at the coffee shop down the street, like just having somebody and kind of framing it, saying to them, like, all I really need you to do is pretend like you're going to go and buy a bracelet on this website for Mother's Day. And let me just ask you some questions about your experience as you click through things. And then you can kind of guide them, like, you're looking for a bracelet, if the bracelet is a gift. So kind of setting up those contextual components, you can get a wealth of information, just from doing that once or twice. Two people with the same directives will end up in completely different parts of the site. And you just won't know what that looks like unless you're actually getting in front of people.
Right. Can I just add on? And
yeah.
in today's world, you can also, we like to, in addition to user interviews, we also like to do, for established businesses, we like to run some like screen recordings, heat maps, and just paying attention, to what people, draw themselves to, right? What are they clicking on? What's important to them? That allow, all of this information gathering happens in a background, right? This happens, before a pixel is even pushed in any direction. So once that one, and I just want to make sure that, like, the audience that is listening to us, hopefully the brands and the companies, understands that before you get to see anything, there's so much research and content gathering and analysis that happens so that we can make smart decisions into creating the right user experience.
Yeah, I think that's a really critical point, is that like because all of this stuff is happening in the background and it's sense making activities, like oftentimes it's not, like if you're not making space for it, it's probably not going to happen. And so as an organization, if you are in a leadership position or you're overseeing a team, it's sort of your responsibility to create that culture or to expect that people will do this. Like oftentimes UX designers, you'll see that they have this research skill, but it's just not being leveraged within the organization because the people who are responsible for the decisions aren't requesting that information from their team. They're not like tasking somebody to go out and gather this and bring it back to them. So when you don't have that kind of leadership that's like looking for that kind of data or for that kind of storytelling, then, it's not going to happen organically, I think.